Hello, my dear ladies. Like my tree? I know it probably looks a bit out of place, but we need it here for today's tutorial, and that's because the very title of this tutorial is The Tree in the Room. So I thought it apropos to have a tree in the room. You know that I'm Menopause Taylor, the gynecologist who teaches you everything under the sun about menopause. You've tuned into a little unit I call the Neglect series. It addresses the fact that menopause is the most neglected topic on earth. And today we're going to explore some of the ways that neglect manifests itself. This is video 235, and there are just 4 videos in this little unit, so if you haven't watched videos 232, 233, and 234, you should watch those before you watch this one. You know how people refer to the elephant in the room when something is really obvious but no one seems to see it? Or sometimes everyone sees the elephant but they refuse to talk about it? The idea is that despite the fact that the elephant is undoubtedly the largest thing in the room, everyone acts like it's not even there. It looms over everything. In other words, it's impossible to miss it, but still everyone dismisses it. Well, last week I likened menopause to a tree. Instead of this huge tree, I showed you this little tree. And I called it the Tree of Menopause. I explained that the trunk represents estrogen loss, because estrogen loss is what underlies and causes everything that happens at menopause. But the trunk branches out into smaller branches, and each branch is a consequence of estrogen loss. So, there are big branches for the 3 diseases that result from estrogen loss: heart attack, osteoporosis, and Alzheimer's disease. And there's a branch for each and every symptom of menopause. The key is to understand that the estrogen loss that constitutes the trunk of the tree is the very reason for every one of the branches. And when it comes to managing your menopause, you can focus on the trunk and replace the estrogen, in which case you will prevent all the symptoms and the diseases. Or you can focus on each branch individually, in which case you will only prevent that one symptom or disease. Now, you would think that with the Tree of Menopause having a huge trunk, just like an elephant, that people would trip over the trunk from time to time and acknowledge that it's there. But that's not happening. Well, today we'll address the tree as a whole, and we'll be applying the principle of the elephant in the room to the tree in the room. Because just as everyone ignores the elephant in the room, they exercise the most glaring sense of neglect when they ignore the Tree of Menopause in the room. And I'm going to depict some of the instances when that is the case. Now, you know me, I like to start at the beginning. So let's do this in a manner that addresses the neglect of the tree in the room chronologically. The first instance of neglecting the tree in the room occurs at the time of puberty. There you are, just starting to grow boobs and not yet having started your period. And your mom sits you down to have a little talk. Mom's a bit ill at ease, but she gathers herself enough to warn you about the forthcoming of your very first period. All the while, she's sweating from a hot flash and squirming because of vaginal dryness. Why? Because she is on the doorstep of menopause while she tells you about the doorstep of menarche. Menarche is the word we use for your first period. Both the beginning and the end of a female's reproductive life are sitting right there together with the Tree of Menopause smack dab between them in the middle of the room, and your mom and you don't see it. You don't see it because, heck, you don't even know about menarche yet. How in the world are you going to know about menopause? But Mom, what's her problem? She's been around long enough to know about the Tree of Menopause. The problem is that she's never bothered to learn about it. Or she's decided to ignore it, deny it, dismiss it, neglect it. And now, even though the tree is all but falling on her head, she can't see the tree in the room. It would be such a great opportunity for her to introduce you to both menarche and menopause if only she'd acknowledge the tree. I can't think of a better way to warn your daughter about menopause than to compare and contrast it to its bookend. Menopause is puberty in reverse. So when your mother told you about puberty and your first period, it was the perfect opportunity for her to tell you about the reverse. But alas, it was the phenomenon of the tree in the room. And not only did your mom miss it, she dismissed it. And the opportunity was lost because Mom decided to neglect the tree and pretend that it wasn't there at all. So you enter your young adult life, you get used to having your monthly periods, and you know that they're connected to your ability to get pregnant. And you probably had a couple of pregnancies over the next 3 decades. But during that time, you or your girlfriends probably addressed the issues pertaining to waiting to get pregnant at a later age. The phenomenon of decreasing fertility inevitably entered that conversation. Of course, that conversation focused on your eggs. It was all about the dwindling number of eggs, the dwindling quality of those eggs. Not many left there at this point. Eggs, eggs, eggs. You certainly didn't dismiss your eggs. You knew that those eggs were going to disappear one day. But did anyone go beyond the eggs and talk about your dwindling estrogen? The two are inextricably connected. The tree of menopause was once an egg tree. So even though you and your friends talked about the egg tree, you neglected to talk about the estrogen tree. There it was, sitting right in the middle of the room, and you all ignored it, missed it, dismissed it. Even though the egg tree and the estrogen tree were one and the same, even though the lower quantity of eggs would go hand in hand with a lower quantity of estrogen, even though one day you would all be living in the menopause tree. As time marches on, you begin to experience Peary Menopause. This is where your periods get wacky. They're heavier, more irregular, less predictable. You aren't focused on fertility anymore, so you just find your wacky periods odd and inconvenient. But along with your wacky periods, you sense that something just isn't right. The hints are only occasional, but they're definitely there. That one hot flash, the middle of the night wake-ups, your irritable mood. You tell yourself that it's just a bad case of prolonged PMS, even though that makes absolutely no sense with regard to the timing. As you stare directly at the tree, planted firmly in your room, you blind yourself to it. It's definitely in your way, but you decide to just go around it. You don't entirely miss it, but you do completely dismiss it. gosh, you used to neglect the tree only when you were in the presence of other people. But now you neglect the tree even when you're alone with it. Your family senses that something is wrong too. Your tree of menopause is making their lives difficult. They miss the old you, but they dismiss any inclination to talk about it. They don't dare say anything to you. Instead, they just follow your lead and act like the tree isn't there right along with you. Then, Peary Menopause progresses. It lasts for years. You go from sitting under the tree to hugging the tree. And from there you go to climbing the tree. Your symptoms of menopause just keep getting more and more significant. You would think that this extra close relationship with the tree would make you wake up and shake you up enough to acknowledge that you're always in contact with the tree. But no, you choose to neglect the tree. You're at the point where it's impossible to miss the tree, yet you still manage to dismiss it. And finally, post-menopause arrives. Your periods completely disappear. Now the tree is looming really large. There's no way to avoid it. It consumes you. Inevitably, you end up living in the tree. It's the tree of menopause, and it's where you'll live for the rest of your life. It dictates your very quality of life in both the short term and the long term. Every part of your body manifests some aspect of what the tree of menopause has to offer. From your head to your toes, there are signs and symptoms of a tree trunk that is completely devoid of estrogen. And the branches, which signify the symptoms of estrogen deficiency, are ever present and exceedingly annoying. You realize that something's happened, but you still don't want to acknowledge it. Not to anyone else and not even to yourself. So you just continue living in the tree of menopause without relief from your symptoms, failing to see that the tree isn't just in the room, it is the room. Your friends notice that you've become unavailable. You're always up in your tree. Of course, some of them have climbed into their own menopause trees and made them their home, just like you have with yours. You would think that society would notice all the women living in menopause trees, feeling isolated and invisible. You would expect them to coerce these women out of their trees, offer them relief, and talk about what drove them up the tree in the first place. But society doesn't acknowledge the tree either. They certainly don't nurture it or support it. Instead, they just neglect it. There are whole forests of trees, all neglected. So you suffer in silence. All the while, you wonder why nobody talks about the tree. And because they don't talk about the tree, you don't even realize that there are huge branches that represent terrible diseases on the menopause tree. It's bad enough to have to live in the menopause tree amongst all the branches of annoying symptoms. Little do you know that eventually it's those big branches, those big disease branches, that will get you. Dealing with the symptoms is one thing, but if those big branches fall on you, they can kill you. They represent heart attack, osteoporosis, and Alzheimer's disease. So as your time living in the tree lengthens, You move from the smaller branches to the larger branches, assuming that they're safer. Little do you know that your very intention of seeking safety will lead you to your demise. You end up dwelling on those big branches, yet you still fail to see that the tree in the room was the tree of doom. And as your time in the menopause tree marches on, those big branches befall you. One day, the big branch on which you sit detaches and falls to the ground, carrying you with it and crushing you. And even though all the while the consequences of estrogen deficiency should have been obvious, you were oblivious. Now, I know that this analogy between menopause and a tree is a bit odd, but the point is that neglecting the tree in the room is never beneficial. Just as nothing beneficial comes from neglecting the elephant in the room, nothing beneficial comes from neglecting the tree in the room. This is especially true when the tree consumes the entire room and eventually becomes your entire home. In every stage of life that I presented, the tree was looming, but no one chose to acknowledge it. Even when trees fall right on top of woman after woman, everybody ignores it. And we all end up living in the menopause tree, no matter how hard we try to avoid it. Yet, even when it's impossible to miss the tree, you dismiss the tree. So ladies, it's time to bring attention to the tree of menopause. Regardless of which stage of life you're in, talk about the tree of menopause. Learn about it. Anticipate it. Plan for it. You cannot dodge the tree. So why not learn how to live your very best life in the tree? Dismissing it gets you nowhere. I'm here to help you any way you please. You can schedule a consultation with me at menopausetailor.me, and I'll educate you and help you tailor everything to your menopause your way. Other than that, be sure to subscribe. Follow me on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And come back in a week when I'll begin the big unit on Alzheimer's disease. It will be the third disease that is directly due to estrogen deficiency, because we've already covered the other two, heart attack and osteoporosis. So don't forget to come back to learn about Alzheimer's. Bye.